sponsored by Skillshare. Hi guys, it's Claire, welcome back. Today I wanted to chat a little bit about some of my reading and booktube goals for 2021. And in order to do that, I wanted to take a look back at my reading goals from 2020 in order to see how many of those I met and to think about the ways that my goals have either changed or stayed the same in some cases for 2021. So I thought I would take a look at last year's video and talk first about my 2021 reading goals, and then I do want to talk a little bit about some of my booktube goals for the new year as well. And as always, my goals in reading, as in life, are not super numbers based and are more vibes based, if you will. So if I'm remembering correctly, my primary goal for 2020 was to just have a better reading year. I had a pretty lackluster reading year in 2019, and so at the start of 2020, I was really thinking about how I could set myself up to be more excited about reading and to also have more rewarding reading experiences that year. So let's take a look. I love when books help contextualize each other and when they're in conversation with each other, and when reading books side by side kind of enriches and deepens your experience of each text on its own. In 2020, I just want to be smarter and more intentional about the way that I'm choosing the books that I want to read. I want to be actively thinking and reflecting about what I'm curious about and what I want to learn this year, and I want to kind of try to seek out lesser known books that are related to what I'm currently reading in hopes of kind of setting off one of those reading streaks and getting into a great groove and rhythm of reading. So basically my big goal for 2020 was to find certain topics, themes, authors, or genres that would allow me to read several interrelated books alongside one another or in conversation with one another. I really wanted to find these kind of clusters of books or reading chains, and that's definitely something that I want to keep pursuing in 2021. And I'm happy to say that I did strike on a few of those reading clusters or reading streaks in 2020. Reading Emily Wilson's translation of the Odyssey by Homer, for example, set me off on a Homer kick of sorts this summer. And I started reading the Iliad as well, which I do still need to finish. But I also read several Homer-inspired contemporary works like The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller, Cy Twombly's 50 Days at Ilium, and Memorial and Excavation of the Iliad by Alice Oswald. And it was really rewarding to read all of those books kind of in context with one another. I also read several more books in 2020 that I would say fall under the micro genre of millennial fiction. I read a lot of books like that in 2019, and I kept reading books like that in 2020, including Exciting Times by Nisha Dolan, Luster by Raven Leilani, Lot by Brian Washington, and then later in the year, Real Life by Brandon Taylor would also qualify as millennial fiction, I would say. And continuing to read those kinds of books just gave me an opportunity to think a little bit more deeply about the meanings and boundaries of that micro genre and how we think about it and talk about it. And lastly, as I've mentioned, I read a lot of romance last year. Not a lot by the average romance reader standards, I would say, but a lot by Claire standards. And while I was reading all of those books, I also did read Reading the Romance by Janice A. Radway, which was a cool opportunity to think about that genre more seriously and in a kind of academic context. So those were the reading clusters that I ended up landing on in 2020. But let's see what I had in mind for potential clusters back at the beginning of the year. First up, I want to read Hilary Mantel's Thomas Cromwell series. Yeah, that did not happen this year, and I honestly don't know when it's ever going to happen. Wolf Hall is a book that I have both wanted to read for a really long time and also have never been in the mood to read. So I'm not going to keep that one on my TBR for 2021, and I guess that book will just have to happen when it happens, if it happens. Next up. Speaking of Robin Hobb, one of the great revelations of 2019, despite it being a mediocre year overall, was reading her Live Ship Traders trilogy and realizing that I could really enjoy epic fantasy. Okay, so I believe this is leading into me saying that I want to explore other genres as well. In 2020, I want to kind of continue challenging my own assumptions about what genres I like or don't like. Maybe this is the year that I will give some hard sci-fi a try and maybe even explore some mystery, thriller, crime fiction. I really thought that I included historical fiction in that list as well, but maybe that's because I tried reading Life After Life Life by Kate Atkinson earlier this year and bailed once I realized it was becoming a World War II novel. And I remember thinking at the time that historical fiction is not really my jam, which I think is true. In terms of mysteries and thrillers, I did try reading In the Woods by Tana French, which is an author that I mentioned in this video as being one that I wanted to try. And I was enjoying it, but I also then got about 160 pages in and then spoiled the ending for myself and then never picked it up ever again. I am a spoiler queen, so I don't know that I am really cut out to be a mystery thriller reader, to be honest. In terms of sci-fi, I didn't end up reading any sci-fi this year, but in this video I do mention wanting to try The Third Body Problem, which is a book that is still on my TBR for 2021. It was originally recommended to me by a friend who then recommended it to another friend who's currently reading it and loving it, so I do want to give that book a try this year. And then in terms of other genre fiction, I did mention reading and loving Robin Hobb's Live Ship Traders trilogy in 2019, which was the first adult fantasy series that I ever read. And I would love to read another fantasy series in 2021, whether it be another Robin Hobb series or something else. I have been thinking about maybe trying the Poppy War series by R.F. Kuang, but if anyone has fantasy recs for someone who enjoyed the Live Ship Traders trilogy, definitely let me know. One area that I want to explore more in my reading in 2020 are books by and about Native Americans or people indigenous to North America. I kind of forgot that this was an explicit goal that I had for 2020, even though I did kind of meet it. I mentioned later in this video wanting to read The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee by David Truer and Savage Conversations by Leanne Howe, both of which I read this year, and I really, really loved Savage Conversations in particular. And then I recently at the end of the year read Whereas, which is a book of poetry by Layli Long Soldier, which was also wonderful. And I would like to continue reading books by Indigenous authors in 2021, including Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Kimmerer, which is at the top of my list for that. I also have Shell Shaker on my list, which is a novel by Leanne Howe. And I would also love to read a Louise Erdrich book this year too, but I'm also curious to see where this reading goal takes me in the next year. Another area that I would like to read more deeply into are books about the American West. Wow, I have no memory of that being a goal for 2020, nor do I have any interest in making it a goal for 2021. Speaking of modern American classics, one of the authors whose work I want to explore more of this year is Toni Morrison. I did read Sula this year by Toni Morrison. I did not read any of her other books, including The Bluest Eye, which I had put on my list for 2020, but I did really enjoy reading Sula, so perhaps I will try to read another Toni Morrison in 2021 as well. Moving further afield, this year I would also like to read some more books about the Balkans and Bosnia in particular. That did not happen in 2020. It's an area that I am still interested in, and I actually just downloaded a new novel by Semezden Mehmedinovic, which is being published later this spring. So maybe I can read that book alongside his poetry collection Sarajevo Blues, which is one book that I was hoping to read in 2020 but didn't get to. I read a lot of Japanese fiction in 2018, and I'm hoping to potentially get back to that a little bit in 2020, especially because at the time in 2018 I had all of these grand plans to read a bunch of Japanese classics, books like The Makioka Sisters by Junichiro Tanizaki or Kokoro by Natsume Soseki, or just more Kawabata because I read Snow Country and really loved it. I did read Thousand Cranes by Kawabata this year, and I really enjoyed it. Kawabata's writing is so cold, but also like weirdly sensual, and even though all of his female characters are one-dimensional at best, for some reason I just really like his books, so maybe I will try and read a little bit more Kawabata this year. That could be fun. Speaking of classics, there's also a part of me that has been like, what if 2020 is the year where I just read some of those big, long, satisfying classics? Maybe books like In Search of Lost Time by Marcel Proust. I've also technically said that I'll read Moby Dick as part of a reading group that my friend has put together, so ideally I'll follow through on that. LOL, this was not the year for Proust, nor do I think 2021 will be. I did try and read Moby Dick earlier this year and just wasn't loving it, and so I abandoned that the second that lockdown hit. In terms of other classics, I guess I did read The Odyssey this year, and I would like to go back to the Iliad in 2021 and finish reading that, but I feel like some of those longer Russian and Victorian novels that I had in mind when I mentioned this goal are gonna have to wait. That being said, reading White Ivy last year did make me want to go back and read some more Edith Wharton. I've read The Age of Innocence and The House of Mirth, and I really, really loved The House of Mirth in particular. So yeah, let's actually make reading more Edith Wharton this year a 2021 goal, along with Invisible Man and East of Eden, which are both on my perpetual TBR at this point. Okay, interesting. I guess I did okay, not great in terms of sticking to some of those goals, but I do think that the mindset and approach to reading that I was hoping to have in 2020 did prevail, which I think is the most important part. And I think that these topics were more ideas that I wanted to have in mind more than anything else. And I kind of want to keep approaching 2021 the same way. I want to have some ideas about things that I might be excited about reading, but then I also want to kind of leave the freedom to go wherever my nose takes me. But in addition to potentially reading a new fantasy series, more books by Indigenous authors, the Iliad, some Edith Wharton, and potentially some more Kawabata, I would also like to potentially look at two other categories. The first is books inspired by Nothing Ever Dies by Viet Thanh Nguyen, which, as I've mentioned, is a book about memory and the Vietnam War, and it's also a great jumping off point for further reading about a lot of topics and places. One of those being the conflict and genocide in Cambodia. I don't have particular titles related to that picked out yet, but it is an area of recent history that I would like to read more about. I think it could be kind of interesting to put it in conversation with some of the books that I've read about the Bosnian genocide. And then I would also like to do some further reading about historical and cultural memories. So I would like to read the book The Future of Nostalgia by Svetlana Boym, which is name-checked in Nothing Ever Dies and which looks at memory and nostalgia in post-communist cities in Europe. And then the other theme that I would like to potentially read around in 2021 is that of commercial or book club fiction. And I started thinking about this actually when I was reading The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett earlier this summer. And while I was reading it, I was just wondering why I am so susceptible to the tropes and manipulation of the romance genre, but I'm not nearly as susceptible to kind of tropes and manipulation when reading more general commercial fiction, and I'm not really sure why. And so one of the books that I want to read about book club fiction is another book from Janice Radway, and that is A Feeling for Books, the Book of the Month Club, Literary Taste, and Middle Class Desire. And the subtitle alone sounds potentially provocative, so I would love to read that this year and spend a little bit more time thinking about literary categories and book club fiction in particular. And then the other more general reading goals that I have in 2021 are to continue DNFing books. I DNF'd quite a few books this year, many of them at around the halfway mark, and those are books that I think in the past I would have plowed through. And it's been much more liberating this year to just make a clean, swift break when books aren't working for you. And so I would like to continue doing that this year. And lastly, in 2021, I would also like to be better about reading books that I already have downloaded on my Kindle, mostly because I have a bad habit of forgetting that they exist. Some of those books include An I Novel by Minae Mizumura, Our Beloved Kin by Lisa Brooks, Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. So yeah, I think that I have an issue of out of sight, out of mind. So yeah, that's something to be more mindful of in 2021. And then for some quick booktube goals, my biggest goal in 2021 is to continue pushing myself to create more review videos and themed discussion videos. They are quite a bit of work, but they're also the videos that I find most rewarding to make. And I do think I have a bad habit of allowing myself to get psyched out or overwhelmed by the mere idea of how much work it might be, which is why I often only end up summoning the energy to do maybe 3 or 4 review videos a year. And so I think if I spend less time in 2021 thinking about how much work it might be and just actually doing the work, I could hopefully get a lot more of those kinds of videos done. So yeah, that's my big booktube goal for 2021, just because I already have several ideas for the kinds of videos that I might like to make this year. And so I would love to be able to see those come to fruition. And then I would also like to continue doing monthly wrap-ups this year. I had a while there where I was doing only like seasonal wrap-ups, but then got back in the monthly wrap-up groove at the end of last year, and so I would love to keep doing that for the rest of 2021. So those are my reading and booktube goals for 2021. Let me know what your reading goals are for the new year, if you have any, or even just some books that you're looking forward to or hoping to get to sometime in 2021. Before I head out, I wanted to mention that this video is kindly sponsored by Skillshare. Skillshare is an amazing online learning platform for curious and creative people looking to build new skills and explore their passions, whether that be candle making, video editing, website development, or productivity habits. One thing I would like to do in 2021 is learn some new recipes, and one area of cooking and baking that has always confounded and intimidated me is bread baking. So I took a Skillshare class called Easy and Versatile Baking: The One Yeast Dough You Need to Know, taught by Chef Julia Turchin, and it was a fantastic introduction to yeast and how it works. The class walks you through a simple, basic dough recipe and then shows you how it can be adapted and customized for several different kinds of baked goods, from garlic knots to raspberry jam rolls. Skillshare classes are designed to fit your busy schedule. It's less than $10 a month with an annual subscription, and it's curated specifically for learning, meaning that there are no ads, and Skillshare is also always launching new and exciting premium classes for you to explore. So if you're interested in exploring your creativity through Skillshare today, the first 1,000 subscribers to click on the link in the description box below will get a free trial of premium membership. Thanks again to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. As always, thanks to you for watching, and I'll see you next time.